The children went outside, ran out, and suddenly saw the guys lying in blood. They were extremely impressed. I say, "Talia, what's there?" And he replies, "It seems like nothing." Later, in the hospital, we were told that there wasn't one eye, that his jaw was completely blown out, that the entire left side was completely bruised. The neighbor, the one who was killed, had 6 children. My father was killed by Russian shelling, and now we are left without a father.
I would like to note that the Russian Federation has a sufficient supply of various cluster munitions. But we haven't used it yet. We didn't have such a need. The residents of Malyniv became victims of cluster munitions several times. Such mines cover a very large area. And if they are used to attack settlements or other concentrations of the civilian population, this may constitute a war crime. Since February 24, Malyniv community was under constant shelling, and those shellings did not stop until September. During the active hostilities in our community, of course, there were both dead and wounded people because of shelling with cluster munitions. The civilian population suffered greatly, but our community police officers were constantly with us. They were with us every day, organizing their work. I am from Malyniv. I was born here, live and work here. There were a lot of attacks, starting with multiple launch rocket systems such as Uragan, Smerch, Grad, and artillery ammunition and Pions. As a result, local residents, their property and houses suffered a lot. For each of those attacks, we immediately went to the scene and provided first aid. All the facts, the shelling, were recorded by us, the investigative team.
From the side of Kharkovo, we heard a rumble like an airplane. I shouted, "Everyone to the cellar, the plane is flying." Our door was open. I was the first to run into the yard, followed by my husband, but 2 neighbors and a relative did not have time to do it.
There was a strike on Shiroka Street. The men were sitting on a bench near the yard, and at that time, the shelling began from the side where the Russian troops were standing.
A cluster bomb exploded in the air. Everything was exploding, the slate fence, the windows, everything was scattered. In one of the rooms of the house, the ceiling collapsed and a wall was destroyed. When we ran outside, the 3 of them were all covered in blood. The neighbor was already dead. He died immediately and 2 others were wounded. I have 2 daughters. I was very worried about them. At that moment, they were inside the house. I ran an in. One daughter was lying on the floor, and the other was just standing. She was terrified. Then when everyone, including the children, ran outside and they saw that the guys were lying in blood, it really shocked them.
It was the attack of the rocket salvo fire system, cluster munitions. It struck here, we arrived. Well, now the fence has been repaired. It is in order. 1 dead person was lying next to the bench. 2 wounded people were nearby. The wounded were treated until the ambulance arrived. We stopped the bleeding. The bleeding was profuse and tourniquets were applied. Volosco, a resident of Malyniv village, became one of the 3 victims who were sitting on a bench when a cluster munition hit.
My husband was coming from the shop and met his relatives here. He approached them and it happened so quickly. I heard that projectile being fired. It whistled in the air like a helicopter, but it wasn't a helicopter. It was a cluster munition, and I ran from the garden to my house, to the yard. When I ran in, I could hear it exploding. I wanted to take the children to the cellar, but then I realized that there was no point because it was exploding. I went out into the garden to see where it hit. I look, and it's over that house. It's like smoke. It just exploded like that. I say, Tolio, what's there? And he replies, it seems like nothing. Later in the hospital, we were told that there wasn't one eye, that his jaw was completely blown out, that the entire left side was completely bruised, his leg was completely crushed. Everything was cut, his hands were broken. The hands were so swollen. Yes, fragments are coming out. We even took a fragment out of his hand, probably about 2 months ago. It comes out little by little. But there are still many fragments left. They were not removed from his jaw then, because the doctors were saving his life. The neighbor, the one who was killed, had 6 children. 1 is an adult and 5 are small. Father was very kind to the children. He did everything. Day and night worked for the children, so that they had everything. He was kind. He loved his children and his wife. And now, as they say, there are no windows, no doors, and she is alone with her children. There are 6 children. The oldest child is 18 and the youngest one is 3 years old. Then some people came. The children were taken to the cellar so that they would not see their father, because it was a very scary scene for children. We lived here as a big family. Mother, father, sisters, brother. Everything was fine. Then that attack happened and Dad was killed by Russian shelling. And now we are left without a father.
On Kozatska Street, a woman's arm was crushed between the wrist and elbow. It was hanging on a tendon, an open fracture. The second woman was also wounded. She was cut by fragments. Head, neck, arms, legs, everything was cut.
We were sitting under the canopy. The shooting continued all the time. The shot was from this side. I stretched out my hand, wanted to pick up the stick, but it flew like that on the ground. That big ball of fire hits my hand and knocks it off. The hand hangs on the skin itself. I shout to her, "Lift me up!" And she says, "I'm also wounded in the back of my head," and holds the back of her head.
Have you called an ambulance?
Yes.
Did it hit the garden?
Yes.
Raise your hand. What were you doing in the garden, huh?
Who knows?
Well, did you hear what was happening? 36 Kozatska Street, a woman wounded in the head, and the woman's arm is shattered. Let's go into the ambulance because
There's 3 of them.
Come on, come on, come on. Sit down, sit down.
Faster! That day, the whole street was shelled. Yes, from this side. It was a cluster munition, and all the way to the end of the street, when the ambulance was taking us, he drove like this. There was such a shelling all along the street that it was impossible to drive. The Russians stood and fired at Malyniv from the plant all the way to the end, to Bashkirivka. Oh, thank you very much. God bless our valiant police. The guys arrived on time, provided help thanks to them. They sent us. They bandaged us for 3 minutes. It all took 3 minutes. Thank you very much. God bless them with health.
Everything will be fine. I also have 2 small children who were here with my wife and stayed at home, because she did not want to go anywhere without me. And I am an official. I could not go anywhere with them. There was such a case when I even covered my own child with myself in the yard when the shelling began. Everywhere we went, we recorded everything, that is, all the hits. This is a playground with ammunition that did not explode. This is a fragmentation cluster munition. There are a lot of striking elements, shrapnel and others.
We have the following consequences of the shelling of the Russian Federation. Bigots who, I don't know, mock our people, who... They have no mercy for people. We don't have any military units here. We don't have anything here, and these Russians, Rushists? Well, they're just inhumans who open fire at civilians. Sometimes it's like I'm going through it all over again, and it happens often. I remember everything down to the last detail, as if it's just happened